Uncle Mark.
Shalom.
I don't know about you, but in these...
Nobody does, Dan. Nobody does.
Nobody does.
Yes.
In these trying times, I turn to literature for wisdom. I don't know. I
to the written word.
I feel like one thing we can all agree on is that no wisdom is going to come out of our television screens because they have things like, you know, they are politicians on them and stuff. So
not since Dynasty was canceled.
Right? Where are we supposed Cheers is gone. How are we supposed to get all of our wisdom?
Yeah,
so,
Falcon Crest kind of helped me along for a minute. But
was Dynasty canceled, or did they just complete the story?
that story is never complete.
That is such a philosophical conundrum, isn't it?
Look, the show may be canceled, but the story continues.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
But maybe Uncle Doug has some literature-based wisdom to impart to us. What do you think?
Well, I have neither. Because it's something from the Bible, so it's neither wise nor literary.
Well, then how about just a story, a tale of wonderful morality that we can apply to our lives today?
Right.
Oh, I hate
You
to
said
disappoint
Bible.
you again.
Doug just hangs up.
Doug's done.
Click. Well, dear
Color
uncles,
bars. What's the audio color bars?
You gotta have synesthesia for that.
Yeah, exactly. After taking a couple deep dives off the 10-meter board into the shallow end of the baptismal font, by delving into some of the longest and most bonkers books in the Bible like Genesis, Leviticus, and Revelation, I took what passes as a sabbatical during COVID-19 by covering a couple of the shortest books in the Bible like Philemon and Ecclesiastes. Well, I guess I felt like I needed to pull my weight around here, Uncle Mark.
Hey.
No, you did single-handedly in one segment tackle Ezekiel.
I remember I was in my apartment in Toronto halfway through reading it, and I'm like, oh, fuck this. Fuck this shit. Fuck this podcast. But yeah.
Yeah,
you guys are bad at choosing, is all I'm saying.
And that will be proven today.
Yeah.
I didn't have it in me to take on one of the longer books, so I opted for number 19 on the worst offender of Uncle Doug's first rule of the Bible. And as we'll see, as I read this book, I began to convince myself that this was the most vile and violent book in the Bible. But it turns out that while it's in the top 10, it's not in the top 5.
Okay.
So, today I want to talk about the book of Joshua. Joshua is the first book after the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, which, you know, the Pentateuch encompasses the creation of the earth through Exodus of the Jews from Egypt, which never happened.
Right.
Joshua is referred to as the first book of the Deuteronomistic history.
Almost
Nailed
got
it.
it. Almost got it.
Like, this segment is going to be a lot of me making bad, vocal choices.
It's a 7 shilling word, or 7 shekel word. You almost got it.
Exactly. As many Christians and Jews believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, many believe that Joshua wrote the book of Joshua. He did not. The author
Considering the likelihood that there was no Joshua, yeah, it seems unlikely that he wrote the book.
Are you going to
Exactly.
tell me that Garp didn't write The World According to Garp?
Right. Spider-Man was so good at his own illustrations.
or that the dude didn't write The Big Lebowski. The author is anonymous, if there was only one, and the book itself was probably written in the 6th or 7th century BCE. Few, if any, of the events depicted actually occurred, and the book is most likely an amalgamation of various actual events that took place all over the region in all kinds of different time frames, exaggerations of those events, and myths and legends. You know, the Bible.
Right.
The true stuff.
Yeah. It leaves off at the end of Deuteronomy, where the Israelites are crossing the River Jordan into the Promised Land for the first time. Moses, however, because God is a dick, is refused entry and dies. His main lieutenant, Joshua, is put in charge, and that's where the story picks up. The book itself is broken into 4 parts: God's pep talk, Joshua's conquest, the division of the conquered lands, and Joshua's farewell speech. This works perfectly for my purposes, as I'm only going to cover the first 2 parts today, because unlike Joshua and his army, I give a shit about humanity. Now, I don't want to spend much time talking about the personality and character of Joshua, because frankly, neither did the Bible. Let's just say, for the purposes of this story, you are what you do. Also, pronunciation disclaimer, I'm going to say a bunch of surnames and place names wrong, partly because in all likelihood they didn't exist, and mostly because I don't care. If I happen to mispronounce the name of a fictitious king that was slaughtered by a fictitious army in a fictitious land, please at me all you want.
Yeah,
All right.
Doug's just trying to start a beef with Israel.
That's right.
All right, here we go. Joshua chapter 1 begins right where Deuteronomy 34 leaves off.
Oh, good. I was hoping that was where we were going to pick up.
It's not much of a cliffhanger there. Moses dies and Joshua is appointed. Joshua, son of Nun, that's N-U-N. Joshua is commanded to cross the Jordan River, and wherever the sole of his foot touches belongs to him.
Must
From
be
Lebanon
nice.
to the Euphrates, from the land of the Hittites to the Mediterranean, it's all yours, baby. God promises that no man will defeat him all of his days, saying, "As I was with Moses, so I shall be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee." We'll see that this doesn't pan out exactly.
Well, didn't you just say that he forsook Moses? So
Exactly.
Yeah.
your promises not to forsake are kind of
Yeah.
shallow there.
That's a
Lord.
Trump promise right there.
Yeah.
God continues his pep talk for a few more verses, promising that so long as Joshua is courageous and his people righteous, this land will be theirs and their children's. As we'll see, God was right to place his faith in Joshua. The Jews, not so much. Joshua then commands the Jews to prepare their victuals, because within 3 days they will leave all their women, children, and riches on the side of the Jordan and begin their conquest. The Jews swear their allegiance to Joshua just as they had to Moses. Honestly, that should have been the first red flag. Having the Jews of the Bible pledge allegiance to you might be the most useless thing in the world. Chapter 2
yeah,
has...
that's true. These are the same Jews that flipped on Moses like 20 times in the space of 6 months. So
When he went on a hike, they built a golden calf.
yeah.
So, yeah. Chapter 2 has Joshua sending 2 spies from the land of Shittim, S-H-I-T-T-I-M. Yes,
Yeah, we
Shittim.
talked about Shittim before.
We have.
Yeah.
They're sent to go spy on Jericho, which will be their first conquest. They arrive and find refuge in the house of a harlot named Rahab. As we've said ad nauseum on this podcast, if you're a named woman in the Bible, it's either very good news or very bad news. No woman gets a name.
More toward bad.
Yeah, more toward bad. No woman in the
Although-
Bible gets a name and then just fades away from the narrative.
Although you'd think that the clue toward whether this was good or bad was that she was a harlot.
You'd
but
think,
that turns out not to be the case.
but you'd be wrong.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. The king of Jericho finds out about these 2 guys and demands that she produce them, clearly seeing them as a threat, which they are. Rahab lies and says that they have left her place. She doesn't know where they went. But then she takes them and hides them on her roof under stalks of flax. She tells them that their reputation for mass murder precedes them and that everyone knows about what they did at the Red Sea and how they utterly destroyed the cities of Sihon and Og on the other side of the Jordan. She begs them to show her and her family mercy since she showed them a kindness. They agree, and she lets them escape out of her window on a scarlet rope. They tell her that when the time comes, hang that same rope out her window and gather all that all her family and friends that she wants spared into her house. Chapter 3 begins with Joshua preparing his army for war. He commands the Levite priests to carry the Ark of the Covenant through the army and to the shores of the Jordan, and his army follows. Before crossing, he tells the assembled army that God will surely drive out the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Jebusites from before them. That's called foreshadowing.
Jebusites are always my favorite. I'm never going to not love the Jebusites.
Jebusites, I know, right? Then the priest that bore the ark stepped into the waters of the Jordan, and the water stopped flowing and began to accumulate into a huge mound of water upstream. This allowed the army to cross on dry ground. This is an obvious passing of the genocidal torch from Moses to Joshua. Chapter 4 has Joshua not wanting to waste a good miracle, so he commands 1 man from each tribe to get a rock from the center of the dried-up river and make a pile on the shore, so future generations would know what happened here. I'm not sure why a rock from the middle of the river would be like, oh, well, proof positive.
Yeah,
right. Or you could just have it printed into a book you can get free in any hotel room in the world.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. But from forevermore, that's why we all know that if you see a rock on the side of a river, it means that somebody crossed it once.
Yeah, that a genocidal army made a miracle so their feet didn't get wet.
Yeah, a pile of 12 rocks.
Yeah.
So these guys do this, and then when the priests carrying the ark step kind of out of the riverbed, the Jordan begins flowing again, just like before. Joshua then takes 40,000 or so men and camps at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. At the beginning of chapter 5, it seems that the word of the Israeli army crossing the Jordan on dry ground has made its way to the kings of west of the Jordan. and they do not take the news well. Their hearts melt and their spirits are broken because they know the fate that is marching their way. The narrative then takes a severe right turn into Mutilation Town, as Joshua is commanded by God to make several sharp knives in order to circumcise the children of Israel a second time.
Yikes! Wait, what?
Wait.
Now,
How much more do you need?
Exactly. This is not... I don't have a lot to give here, guys.
There's only so much.
Yeah.
This is not exactly as ghastly as it sounds, because during their wanderings in Egypt, they had several children, 2 generations worth to be exact, and had picked up many converts along the way. None of these had yet been circumcised, so what better time than the eve of battle to cut the tip of your dicks off?
Yeah.
So
It is just as awful as it sounds, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, what you want right before battle is a significant self-wound.
Right,
A significant
exactly.
bleeding wound.
It's like an own goal.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Joshua sets about it, and the place where he does this just happens to be called the Hill of the Foreskins. So, for future reference, when your commander orders your army to pitch camp on the Hill of the Foreskins or the Mount of Amputated Fingers or the Valley of Kidneys, offer to march a little bit further.
Yeah.
So,
Or the mound of Adam's apples.
mention is made here that the army is no longer fed manna or unleavened bread, for since this is supposed to be the land of milk and honey, they begin to eat the fruit of the land instead. I don't think that's fair trade for getting the tip of my dick cut off, but it's not nothing, I guess. The chapter ends with Joshua confronting a man with a sword, only to find out that it's the captain of the Lord's army. Joshua falls on his face in worship and is commanded to remove his sandals, because where he stands is holy, which he does. This is another obvious passing of the blood-soaked torch, as this is what Moses was commanded to do in the presence of the burning bush. Don't worry, this dude will not be a part of the narrative going forward, and we'll never talk about him again.
Yeah,
Good.
that's how that works.
Yeah. Chapter 6 is where the fun begins. Did I say fun? I meant God-sanctioned bloody genocide that has justified 3,000 years of bloodshed and continues to confound peace in the Middle East to this day. So here we go. Jericho is prepared for a siege from the Israelites, so God gives Joshua a battle plan that is, let's say, unique. The army was to silently march in a single circuit around the city every day for 7 days. Then when they had circumnavigated the city and returned to camp, 7 priests with 7 trumpets, reed shofars, were then to blare their soothing music at the top of their lungs until dark.
It's melodious shofar music.
I mean, that's a Gitmo tactic right there.
Pretty much. Then on the 7th day, when the shofar started up after the army's light cardio, the army was to shout at the top of their lungs. This would bring the city walls crashing to the ground, at which point they could enter and kill everyone. This they do. They march around the city 7 times once a day. And then on the 7th day, as promised, they shout with the shofars and the walls come falling down. To be fair, if 7 dudes blared shofars at my house between 5 p.m. and sundown for 7 days, I would gladly burn it to the ground.
Yeah, I would definitely call the police non-emergency number and just say there's like this crazy nuisance just constantly out here.
7 shofars is not a nuisance; it's a crime.
Yeah, it is.
So
It's also, I think,
is that
a
one of the
metal
8
band.
days of Hanukkah? Is it seven shofars blowing?
That's right.
Do they have a Hanukkah song like that?
I
with
wish there
all the
was
birds
7
and-
shofars blowing.
Yeah.
The Israelites enter the city and slaughter everyone inside, with 2 notable exceptions. Rahab the harlot and her family are spared and removed from the city, and all the gold, silver, and vessels of brass and iron are spared and added to the treasury of the Lord. After they had finished killing
Spared.
all in the...
What do they mean spared?
I know, right?
They didn't kill him.
Right,
kill
like
him.
what are they're inanimate objects. Don't kill the brass.
Have at you! After they had finished killing all in the town, and this is laid out in the text, and so many times it's maddening. The young and old, the men and women, the ox and sheep and ass,
Yeah.
they set fire to the rubble so that the rest of Canaan would know what was about to happen to them.
Rubble typally doesn't burn, but
Sure, whatever.
yeah, not at
It's
the
a good
heat those
Middle
guys
Eastern
could
rubble.
generate.
You found a hole in this narrative.
Yeah.
If that's not cruel and violent enough for you, strap in. Chapter 7 is a weird one. It begins with the children of Israel, plural, the children of Israel, and in every instance before this, meaning the collective, the royal we, committing a trespass against the Lord. It turns out that one guy, Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and that the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children, again plural, of Israel. So one guy took an accursed thing, and God is pissed at everybody. Now, that all happens in verse 1, and it's going to take a little time. In fact, it's going to take to the end of the chapter to suss out what was Achan's sin, and what was the accursed thing, and how how to go about removing the stink of one man's sin from an entire people.
He ate an owl.
Spoiler alert, it involves stoning and burning women and children.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
Yeah. So we put aside Achan's sin for a moment and rejoin the narrative. Joshua sends men from the smoldering mass grave of Jericho to Ai. It's spelled A-I, which is beside Bethaven, east of Bethel. You know the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to the east there.
That's where they've got the good mall.
That's right. The outlet stores.
His guys return and report that Ai is poorly guarded.
And they also have the Canaanite casino is out there.
Oh, yeah.
Casino.
I think the roulette is rigged, though. Don't do that one.
The lucky camel. So his guys come back and say Ai is poorly guarded, and he need only send 3,000 men to ransack and destroy the town. These 3,000 men meet an incredible defeat at the hands of 36 dudes from Ai.
Wow.
Right?
Those guys had AKs.
They don't just repel them, but pursue them, inflicting casualties all the way back to Jericho. So can you imagine? It's like 36 commandos from Arnold Schwarzenegger's from the movie Commando.
Yeah.
The defeat is so one-sided and humiliating that Joshua fears that word of it will cause the regional powers to band together and destroy him.
Yeah.
And again, remember, this defeat is because they've committed a sin they don't know about against God. So Joshua rends his garments, puts dust in his hair, and throws himself at the mercy of the Lord.
Like you do.
Yeah. And how would you know if Joshua put dust in his hair? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, what is Joshua's normal dust level?
High, I assume.
Right, especially since the river got out of his way for him to cross it. So.
Yeah, literally, he can't even take a bath.
Yeah,
the water
he repels water like oil or a duck's back.
So the Lord responds that all of Israel has sinned by taking the accursed thing, and unless they sanctify themselves, they will be destroyed. Somehow Joshua figures out that of all the people in his army, it was Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe Judah, that took the accursed thing. He has Achan brought before him and commands him to confess his sin. Achan does just that, hoping for mercy. Not going to get it. It turns out that
does he know Joshua?
Exactly. It turns out that the accursed thing was a goodly Babylonish garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold worth 50 shekels. So basically, a couple armloads of the loot stolen from the now ethnically cleansed people of Jericho. In the midst of an orgy of violence and looting, this one guy grabbed a few trinkets for himself. Confronted, he confessed his sin, and for his confession, what would you guess his reward was? Take your time.
He was forced to eat his own gallbladder.
He had to circumcise his own self.
Both would be better. Achan, the silver and the gold, and the garment, as well as his wife and children, his oxen, his asses, his sheep, and even his fucking tent, are gathered up and stoned to death, then burned.
Wait,
you stoned a tent to death?
Yeah, exactly.
That's some hardcore shit.
That's hardcore shit, but isn't it like one of those baseball pitchbacks? Just the little baseball flies back at you. Pitchbacks, you guys remember those? No, okay, I'm an old man.
Man, sports
There's a little net, and because if you had an absentee father like we did, then you didn't have anybody to play catch with, so you throw the ball at the net and it bounces back to you.
Oh, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, yeah, that can't nearly be true. You've known me for years. That's true. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to dwell too much on this because it's awful, but can you imagine how long it must take to stone an ox to death?
Ugh.
Let alone several oxen? And
the kids you can do in inside of 5 minutes.
Exactly.
A 6-year-old, don't ask me how I know that, but you can stone them in 6 minutes.
And then stoning his wife and children who weren't even fucking there for the crime he committed. The crime.
And his animals that are just property.
Exactly. Well, this indiscriminate, brutal, and blunt violence seems to have had the intended effect of pleasing their omnipotent Lord, because chapter 8 begins with this, quote, "And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai. See, Ai, again, is the name of that city. I have given into thy hand the king of Ai and his people and his city and his land. So let's just take an inventory here, shall we? Josh and his men have just committed literal ethnic cleansing by killing every living thing, including infants, in Jericho, and looted all the gold and silver of the city. God, the all-powerful creator of the universe, noticed that one of his blood-soaked soldiers grabbed a couple shekels for himself. So to balance the eternal scales of justice, God demands the brutal death of his entire family and all they own, and in reward for this act, supplies Joshua with another genocide. Okay, back to the narrative.
Hey, it's just morality.
I was just saying, morality. Get some.
Joshua commanded 30,000 of his men to secretly flank Ai and lie in waiting behind the city.
How did 30,000 men secretly do anything?
They did it on tippy toes, obviously.
Yeah, a city of probably 8,000 people does not know that 30,000 men are just outside.
I think they all hummed in unison. Dum, 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 ba-rum, bum, 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 bum.
He took 5,000 of his men and hid them off to the side. Again, how?
Yeah.
And then took a much more meager force
Behind
and camped.
what?
I know exactly. This is in Palestine. Behind what exactly?
Right. Just
The
fucking
rock?
dirt.
The city walls of Ai were like at least 6 feet high,
Yeah.
so then they couldn't see anything.
They couldn't see over their own walls. He then took a much more meager force and camped directly in front of Ai. In the morning, when the king of Ai saw only this small contingency, and flush with his insane victory earlier, he commands his men to pursue. All the men of Ai chase Joshua, who stretch forth his spear, signaling the 30,000 soldiers to take the city.
Yeah, that's bait.
Yeah, filled now with nothing but women and children, and set it on fire. This they did, and then marched out of the city toward the army of Ai. Joshua turned his host around and also called out the other 5,000 men waiting in the wings.
Wait. The king of Ai burned his own city down?
No, so what happened was the king of Ai saw Joshua with a small force.
Yeah.
He commanded his entire army to attack. Joshua pretended to flee, but then signaled his 30,000 men that the city was unguarded.
Oh.
They invaded the city, set it on fire, and then went out to attack the army.
Because
Right.
a king setting his own city with all the people in it on fire in the Bible, I'd be like, sure, that's what they do.
Yeah, that sounds all the plausible.
Not surprised.
So now the army is surrounded, and no doubt listening to the cries of their families as they burn alive in the in the city behind them.
You say that in such a negative way.
Sorry. So everyone but the king of Ai were slaughtered, according to the narrative. 12,000 people died that day, either by fire or the sword. There was one tender mercy dispensed by the army. All the cattle and oxen were taken alive and added to the army's supply chain. The king was brought before Joshua.
What about their tents? Did they kill their tents? Or their brass?
So the king's brought before Joshua, who, while still alive, watches his entire city burn to the ground, every member of his army killed, and every inhabitant of the city burned alive. He then hanged the king and tossed his body onto the rubble in front of the gates. So, happy days.
Morality.
Remember, according to the narrative, these are the good days. These are the good guys,
Yeah.
and the men, women, and children of Ai, who invaded no one and fought and died to protect their city and family, are the bad guys in this narrative.
Or just burned alive in their beds. Fuck them.
Yeah. Chapter 9 begins with the various Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Jebusite kings deciding that fighting this one force alone is suicide, but banding together might be their only hope. We won't hear about this again until the next chapter. Instead, this chapter is what's called the Gibeonite deception. Forgive me. Emissaries from Gibeon are sent to Joshua to try and trick him into an alliance that will spare their people. They wear old sackcloth and old wine casks adorn their asses, their donkeys, in an attempt to show that they had traveled from much further away than they had. The idea being, if they did not appear to be local and were not therefore a threat, Joshua would enter into an alliance with them because why not? They could then use this. What's that?
I said, okay. It's a great trick. All I'm saying is that is a brilliant deception.
Well, then the idea was they could use this alliance as a shield from invasion and genocide. Again, because this is the Bible, Joshua discovers their quote-unquote treachery, read desperate attempt to save their people, and instead of killing them, makes them all slaves to the Israeli army. Now, chapter 10 may be...
So, an improvement. I think there were...
Yeah, exactly.
there's a
It's
narrative
getting
movement.
nicer as we go.
At least they're alive.
Yeah.
Now, chapter 10 may be...
Good news, guys. Slavery.
I got good news and bad news. I'm not in any way sure of this, but chapter 10 may be the most blood-soaked and genocidal pages ever written. We return to the possible coalition against the Israelites hinted at the beginning of the last chapter. Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, has heard about what Joshua has done to Ai and to Jericho, and now to the once great city of Gibeon, because they tried to make peace with the Israelites. So Adonizedek reaches out to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram.
You're just making this up.
I know. Piram,
Old King Hoham.
Hoham. Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon, and proposes an alliance. Rather than taking on the Israelites directly, he proposes they attack Gibeon.
Can I ask a question? How much land did it require for you to be a king in this area?
10 square miles.
Not even. I think 2
it
blocks.
Can't be. There's like 700 kings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right.
So they decide to attack Gibeon as punishment for capitulation as a warning to other cities. So these 5 kings lay siege to Gibeon, who reaches out to Joshua to remind him, hey, remember how we belong to you now and your God? And you know how your God feels about people touching his things? So we're all about to be killed, so help. Joshua realizes that they're right. God doesn't like other kids playing with his toys. So he marches all night and routs the coalition handily, pursuing them all the way from Gibeon to Beth-horon to Azekah and finally to Makkedah. Not to be outdone,
I'm pretty sure a Mormon mom named all of her kids those names.
Totally.
There is a maxi van passing through our neighborhood right now with those names.
With Makkedah and Azekah on it. Not to be outdone, God hurls great stones down on these armies as they flee, killing more of them than the Israelites were able to slay with their swords. This slaughter lasted all day, and concerned that nightfall might allow some of these fleeing soldiers to escape, Joshua cries out to the Lord, who then stops the sun and the moon in the sky, so Joshua and his merry men can finish their slaughter in full daylight.
That's neat.
Don't worry.
That's a good war trick right there.
Yeah. Don't worry, we're just getting started. The 5 kings broke away from their armies during the retreat and hid themselves in a cave outside of Makkedah, where Joshua commanded them to be walled in and kept there so they would live to see the destruction of their armies. Once that destruction had finished, he brought the 5 kings before him and commanded that the entire army of Israel take turns stomping on their head and necks. I know. After which Joshua smote them, then slew them, then hung them from 5 trees. After that, Joshua had what was left of them tossed back into that cave where he had them walled in.
Okay, so if I am understanding this correctly, there were 30,000 soldiers.
Yes.
And each one of them
50,000
got to stomp
soldiers
on the head and the neck of each one of these men.
Mm-hmm. And then they tortured
30,000 stomps.
Right.
He then hung them, or did he slew them? Okay.
He smote them,
Yeah,
he slew them, and then he hung them.
No, not an additional smote.
Yeah, please don't smite me.
Kicked him in the balls.
Well,
I feel like one thing that needs to be clarified here. Joshua's the good guy, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That, brothers, is one bloody fucking chapter, but we're not even close to done yet.
What if you're the 28,000th guy in line to stomp on these guys, and it's just like, do you just
Your
have to go through the motions?
Ruined.
There's nothing left. Like
Exactly.
you just have to go. Okay, Joshua, here I am stomping on this
Stomp.
puddle of liquid and pulp.
So, having utterly destroyed the armies of the 5 rebellious kings and having completely desecrated their corpses, Joshua was just getting going. He then took his army to 3 of the 5 rebellious cities, Lachish, Hebron, and Eglon, where they, quote, smote it with the edge of the sword and all the souls that were therein, and let none remain. If you're wondering why Joshua left Jarmuth and Jerusalem alone, it's not discussed in the text. He went to 3 of the 5 cities, but
Inconclusive.
one thing I can tell you is that this was not an act of mercy, because Joshua then took his army to Makkedah and killed everyone in that city. Then he went to Libnah and killed everyone in that city. Then he went to Gezer, Kadesh Barnea, Gaza, and Goshen. Only when Joshua had killed all the fleeing soldiers, tortured and executed his captives, and murdered all the men, women, and children in 10 different cities Was his bloodlust sated enough for this chapter and chapter 10? Yeah, it's bonkers. Now, because this is the Bible, and why say in one chapter what you can say in two, chapter 11 is basically a rehash of chapter 10, just on a grander scale. Basically, the entirety of the rest of Canaan, north, south, east, and west, realize that there is no way to negotiate with this invasion, and their only chance is to face them. So the kings of Hazor, Madam, Shimron, Ashphath, Shinneroth, and Dor, and all the remaining Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Hivites gather their soldiers, horses, and chariots together, which were apparently as numerous as the sands of the sea, and Joshua kills them all. Not only did he kill all the soldiers, but all the horses, and why not burned all the chariots?
Sure. Like you do.
Yeah. Joshua and his Israelite horde then went city to city.
They killed all their horses.
They killed all the horses.
Okay.
Because look, it's not like somebody else's horse could be of use to you.
Exactly.
I
At
know.
the time,
They've already
a horse was like the maximum amount of power concentrated in one place that you could generate.
Well, and they've
move
already
shit
been
and ride shit. Like, it's insane.
They've already been looting every other city. So for some reason, they just decide to, utterly fuck it.
These will be of no use to us.
Right. I think they have too many horses at this point.
Yeah.
So Joshua and his Israelite horde then went city to city, killed everyone inside, pillaged the loot and livestock, and burned the rubble. Only the aforementioned people of Gibeon and the Hivites, for some reason, were spared through slavery. So they've just entered Canaan and in half a book destroyed it utterly. When we get to the end of chapter 11, with this nice little encapsulation of the show so far, quote, "So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land rested from war."
Yay! What a blessing.
Yeah. So chapter 12 is just one long recitation of all the kings, cities, and peoples that Joshua and his forces have killed, enslaved, or destroyed upon crossing the Jordan River. And in an act of mercy that Joshua showed to no one, I will not subject you to that list, except to say that several of the kings, cities, and peoples are familiar from the previous chapters, but many of them are not.
Oh, there's more.
There's more.
Oh, my God.
It seems even the Bible got tired of talking about genocide and decided to paraphrase. So that's where we get to in the half of the book, just one half.
Wow.
They enter Canaan from Egypt and utterly destroy it. And that brings us to the end of this miserable segment.
That's delightful.
Yeah,
What a it feels like it should be called there should be like a subheading or a subtitle to this whole book, which is just like, aren't we dicks or something? I don't know.
And no characters are developed. None are given any motivations or stories or pathos or anything. It's just a series of then he went to this city and killed every woman, every child in it and burned it. And then he went to this city and killed every woman and every child and burned it for 12 miserable chapters. So
yeah, I don't know. And you hear this story and the walls of Jericho coming down is this wonderful, happy, hooray! We defeated
it's
Jericho.
Like in children's books.
Who did fucking nothing? They didn't do anything.
Yeah, they were in their homes when they were
just
destroyed.
Chilling.
They were minding their shit.
Yeah.
Right.
This would be a question from I don't know if you guys know the answer to this. I don't, and maybe Hadar or somebody can weigh in on this. But all of these. I don't know if these are tribes or like the Hivites and the Shivites and the Jebites and like how many of those were real? Like,
well, that's a great question, and several of them, Hebron and Gaza,
real places,
are real places. So, like I said at the beginning, this book is kind of it's an amalgamation of actual events that took place all over the Middle East at different time periods. It's an amalgamation of places all over the Middle East that actually existed, and it's a shit ton of made-up stuff and made-up events. So it's
potentially
chaos.
Many of these things could have happened, but maybe at different periods. And maybe is Joshua like a composite character?
I don't think he's a composite character. I think all of these things were put together under the tent of Joshua.
Well, that's what I mean. Like,
yeah, exactly.
They just said, okay, well, all this genocide was under, this fucking Bronze Age Iron Man. We've created this character,
Right.
Yeah.
right, that was the instrument of God's wrath, whereas maybe it was just fucking the shit resource scrambling warfare, and tribal beefs that were in fashion at the time.
Right.
Yeah,
And not for nothing, but if you want to brag about this book or be proud of what this book says, the people of Jericho should write their story, and that's a story you can be proud of. Or the people of all these other towns that were minding their business. The people of Ai who repelled this invading force before they were wiped out.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the story
What was
of the
their crime?
conquest of a land from the perspective of the conquerors.
Well, that's always history's always written by the winners, right?
Truly,
That's right.
but it's hard to talk about how this book is a wellspring of morality and ethics, and this. So,
All right. Well, might makes right, and that's we'll hopefully. Well, I guess we'll just come back to it and hear more.
Spoiler
makes
alert.
right, children. Good night.
yeah.
Good night.
Spoiler alert for part 2. It doesn't get better.
Moving on.